Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, how do you keep equipment operating, radio stations, when the temperature varies 150 degrees? Well, John Antonuk keeps 4 radio stations running year-round in Fairbanks, Alaska. And that's pretty impressive when you consider the harsh and varying conditions there. John joins Chris Tobin and me on This Week in Radio Tech. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Direct Current Broadcast e-newsletter. Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday with technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. And by Lavo and the Crystal Clear Virtual Radio Console. Crystal Clear is the console with a multi-touch touchscreen interface. Welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Delighted to be here. And Chris Tobin is along, too. By the way, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. This is the studio behind me, this glorious studio. This is my studio here in Nashville, in the Man Cave in Nashville. I work for the folks at the Telos Alliance. I'll tell you that for a disclaimer. So if I seem biased in their direction, well, you'll know why. Biased in who knows what direction is Chris Tobin in New York. Hey, Chris, welcome in.
No biases today. I'm doing just fine. Thanks.
So where are you? What's going on?
I'm in a voice booth in a radio station here in New Jersey. Just
All right.
Hanging out, having a good time.
Hey, your station, you've told us a bit about it and all the live on-air work they do and incredible music library they have. But they're primarily a jazz station, is that right?
100% jazz, yes.
All right. So today I saw a comment on Facebook. I don't know if the commenter really knew what they were talking about, but they said there are no jazz stations in New Zealand. And I haven't taken the time to look it back up, but can you imagine a whole country without a jazz station? Is that possible?
It's possible. It's very possible because here in the States, I think we only have 1 or 2 full-time and then a lot of stations that do jazz in part of their programming. So that's very possible.
I guess jazz is a pretty American thing, although there are artists from other countries that perform here, but jazz is a uniquely American invention, yeah?
It's uniquely American, but it's quite popular around the world. A large following in Canada, on parts of France and Spain and Italy, and in Japan as well.
Yeah. Hey, back, 100 years ago, I was playing some jazz on a public station, and man, two of my favorites were Stefan Grappelli and Django Reinhardt. Man, the world stopped when these guys when I had them spinning on when I was spinning their vinyl.
We still spin vinyl here and polycarbonate CDs and occasionally reels of tape, depending on the source. Yeah.
Wow. Well, our guest today has very little vinyl in his facility. He's stuck with all this digital stuff, and for the most part, let me bring in a guest, a guy that I was very pleased to meet last year at the Wisconsin Broadcasters Show, and that's John Antonuk. Hello, John. Welcome in from Alaska, Fairbanks. How you doing, buddy?
Great. Well, it's fun to be here today, Kirk, and yeah, nice to meet you last year. And there might be vinyl stuck in the back of somebody's closet or hanging on the wall, but we don't play any, no turntables, and almost no CDs. Yeah, all the audio is off of next gen hard drive.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about, and I know Chris is going to have questions too. John, earlier today, you and I were talking, and you pointed it out. I guess you're right. I didn't see my own incredible curiosity, but I seem to have an affinity for Alaskan broadcasters, because I think it's just amazing what you guys do. Actually, I spent a little bit of time in Juneau, Alaska, building a couple of FM studios there. That was a long time ago, and building a studio in Juneau, it's about like building a studio in Seattle. It's just a little bit more snow. Yeah. But where you are in Fairbanks is incredible. Hey, by the way, as we get the show started here, let me mention our show today is brought to you by a couple of great sponsors. We'll hear from them later on in the show. One of them is the folks at the Telos Alliance and their Direct Current e-newsletter. Revamped, got a great new look, same great content every week. So be sure you sign up for that. And, of course, by the folks at Lavo and their expanding line of audio consoles and audio over IP stuff and offerings in the cloud and virtual radio. So a message about them is coming up, too. So thanks to those sponsors. All right. John, you've been in Alaska, 30-plus years now, right?
That's right, yeah, since 1985.
Yeah, but you're originally, why did I meet you at Wisconsin?
Well, that's home for me. I was born and raised and went to school there and was originally working in broadcast engineering. then I answered an ad, a classified ad in the back of a magazine. So that'll tell you how long ago it was. And of course, it was Broadcasting Magazine. And in 1985, I moved to Anchorage to be a radio chief engineer. So my wife and I said we were newlyweds. We thought, well, we can try it for a couple of years. And like I said, that was 1985.
So look, okay. First of all, a lot of us in the lower 48 don't really have a great feel for the geography in Alaska. You had to explain to me where Fairbanks was earlier today, and I had to look it up on a map, and I was so way wrong as to where it is. So tell me something about what's life like living in Fairbanks?
So Fairbanks is what's the region called the interior of Alaska, and what that means is it's not coastal. So like where Rich Parker is down in Juneau, that'd be coastal, and it's not Anchorage. So it's not the south central region, the large population center, and it's about 300 miles north of Anchorage, and it's north of the Alaska Range, the Alaska Mountain Range, and so that's where Denali is, formerly Mount McKinley, and it's about 500 miles south of the Arctic Ocean, and so we're closer to the Canadian border. It's eastern Alaska. I think a great thing I always ask people to do is look for one of those maps that's got the outline of Alaska overlaid over the lower 48 to really get a sense of scale.
It's huge. So when you fly to Fairbanks, you're flying over that Alaskan mountain range.
Yep, and that's 23,000 feet. So yeah, it makes for a real interesting flight to Anchorage. It's about a 45-minute flight, and so it's 20 minutes this way and 20 minutes that way, up and down, and that's about it.
I'm pretty sure my Piper. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I prefer to fly on the 737s. There are some small turboprops that make the trip as well in about an hour. And but yeah, I suppose you could do it in a Cessna or something, but I haven't. But
now going
it's a long drive. I won't drive it in the winter, and in the summer it's about a 6 to 8 hour drive, depending on the traffic.
Can't imagine. Well. So, wondering what the place looked like. Of course, I love Google Earth, right? So you can get a view of the city and the town, the streets, and a kind of a wavy view of the buildings. And it looks like small town America. Of course, I've got visions in my head of Nome, Alaska, where you've got Quonset huts everywhere and some other buildings. Yeah. But it looks like, in the summertime anyway, it looks like small town America, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is, and I really like that feel. In Alaska, we have boroughs rather than counties, and the borough population here is around 100,000, maybe a little bit more. The city proper, I think, is 40,000-ish. So it's a nice size. It's a small town feel, but we're like a transportation and distribution hub for a great deal of the interior of Alaska, which you can't reach by road. You can only fly there. So if you're going to some village, it's going to be on the river, and they get their supplies every summer by a barge going up the river, or they fly in small planes during the rest of the year. So in a lot of those flights, they'll come from Anchorage too, but also Fairbanks, and so we have a lot of things here that you might not in a city of 40,000. Like, for example, it's the home of the University of Alaska. Fairbanks is older than Anchorage. I didn't realize that till I moved to Alaska either. Fairbanks became incorporated as a city in 1903, and I think that Anchorage wasn't until the 20s sometime when the railroad was put in, which was really put in to reach Fairbanks. Anchorage was just kind of a stopping over point.
So how many radio stations you got there? You're the chief engineer for the iHeart Media stations there,
right? Yeah. So I work for iHeart Media. I've been here since last May, and in this job, and there are 4 stations here: 1 AM and 3 FM. Let's see, there's probably about 18 stations. Sorry, I didn't count them up ahead of time. I'd say we've got a dozen or so commercial stations, a couple of LPFMs have come on the air here, and just a couple, and University College Kid station, and then the full more NPR type station from the university, and a local religious broadcaster. that's full power. So there's a fair amount of broadcasting here.
It's a lot of radio for a small town or a small medium town.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Anchorage even has like twice that much. It just boggles my mind.
Wow.
I was there in the 80s, and they had, when I heard that they had reached 27 stations down there, I just couldn't believe it. So,
jeez,
so I've built some of the local stations here and worked on most of them, both radio and TV. So it kind of goes around. When I took this job here, it was an easy fit because I had directly worked with half the people at other places in the past, and I knew another quarter of them. And I was already their backup engineer. So the manager, who hadn't been here as long as I had been in town, said, "Oh, we have to get John some keys." And I reached in my pocket and I said, "Don't bother. I've had them for 10 years.
I've had them for years. I've had them. Chris Tobin. That's just like New York City, right? You got keys for all the stations.
I still have keys for many of the places. Yes, that's true.
But you've been a fixture there. But I guess John has too. He's been there for a long time as well, even though the job is fairly new. So, so John, earlier today you kind of set the stage for me. Of course, down here in lower 48, we're thinking that you guys are it's just snow and ice and blizzards all the time, and of course that is not true at all. You have summers that are warm. In fact, you were even complaining, and I got to hear the story about this, and Chris is going to enjoy this too. One of your headaches in the not too distant past has been that the air conditioners quit working, and I think you said two of them at the same time. The backup quit, or something like this, and you had an overheating data center and transmitter sites that need air. This boggles my mind. So help us. And I'm a Southern boy, right? I'm down here in Nashville, Tennessee. Help us understand why you need air conditioning in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Well, we need it in the summertime, Kirk. Fairbanks is the land of the most extremes. And so, in the time that I've been here, I've seen it range from 95 above to 60 below. Now, granted, those are extreme, but I would say typical temperatures are from 80, 85 above to 40 below. And so this was probably about 4 years ago. We had a 95-degree day, and I had just put new air conditioning on a data center at my previous job, and it failed. The alarm system called me up one day and said it's 85 degrees. And well, that shouldn't happen because the thermostat was set to, I think, 72 or something for the data center. And fortunately, the exhaust fan came on and saved the day, but the air conditioning system couldn't shed the heat fast enough. And the reason it couldn't is we have to use glycol in the lines that carry the heat from the evaporator up to the radiator on the roof, because in the wintertime, we're worried about it freezing, right? If the system should shut down or it's not running, if we had water in the line. So the glycol mixture doesn't carry as much heat as just plain water. So it couldn't carry the heat away fast enough. And the temporary fix was go put a lawn, we had to attach a garden hose on the faucet on the outside of the building, put a lawn sprinkler up on the roof and cool the radiators. And then the long-term fix was to put radiators that were 150% of the size to try to get more heat carried away. So, for creature comforts, if you use an economizer in a building, we don't need the air conditioning that much. But for a data center that you want closed loop, much like you might a transmitter site, and we could talk about that a little bit, we have that requirement 12 months out of the year. It's tough.
I do want to talk about it, transmitter side cooling, because that was a topic we talked about here on the show last summer when I was involved with Mike Patton, who's been a guest here a couple times, on showing that it was only this much more expensive to do a closed loop system in our 4 transmitter building in Mississippi than it was to just keep sucking in moisture and dust laden outside air. So I want to hear that, but let's dial back a second. You had a rather interesting story on how you got started in broadcasting, and I want to at least touch on that before we get to the mechanicals of air conditioning a transmitter site.
Oh, that's always fun. So I'll relay it in the context I did of a guy who previously had this job, and I was in his office at another station. This was probably about 10 years ago, and I came over to help him on a Saturday at the TV station, and because I had worked there previously, and he wanted to know some of the stuff I'd worked on, and I laid on the couch in his office, and I kind of went, oh, and he said, what's the matter? And so, he was playing the psychologist, and I was the patient, and I said, well, Dave, it all began as a small child when my mother gave me a radio to listen to, and I wanted to know how it worked, and I took it apart, and when I put it back together, it didn't work anymore, so she thought it would be a good idea if I went to school to study electronics. But actually, through her guidance as well in the Mom Network, she knew the mother of some other guy who's, I think, a year older than me that worked at the local radio station as a part-time weekend guy.
Oh,
and
no.
There I went, and so this was like 1974, 75. I turned 16 in 1975. I was old enough to get a driver's license, and there was no automation then, right? So they needed a warm body in the chair, and it was probably torture to the public to hear me on the air, but I got to play with the equipment, which of course was what I really wanted to do. And I realized that the world would be a better place both for me and for the general public if I was fixing equipment rather than using it to perform. So I went to the University of Wisconsin for broadcasting.
Wow. Now, that's a good story. I got a friend. So now back to the air conditioning thing. To me, of course, it makes sense. Well, why don't you just suck in some of that super cold outside air that you have there in Fairbanks? What? Wait a minute.
In the winter time?
Okay, I realize in here it is in the winter, and you got very short. How short are your days right now?
Well, we're back up to 5 hours, and we're happy about it ever since solstice. Okay. And right now we're gaining really fast, like 6 minutes a day. But it gets down to about 3.5, 4 hours around Christmas time. Yeah, it's that winter blues situation, and I'm really noticing it. Some people have real difficulty handling it, and I'd say definitely we sleep more in the winter time and stay up late in the summer. It's sort of like, geez, 11 already in the summer, and it's time to go to bed. And in the winter, it's like, oh, geez, it's 7. So it had been dark for 4 hours already.
So in the winter, you could pull in outside air.
And I'm sure this is true in a lot of places, but in my experience along the West Coast, for example, eastern Washington and eastern Oregon are really dry, right? Because they're on the Cascade Mountains block that moisture that comes in from the Pacific. And in Alaska, that Alaska range where Denali is blocks the moisture from coming up to the Fairbanks area. So we're actually categorized as semi-arid here. We only get the equivalent of about 12 to 16 inches of precipitation a year. Wow. Sometimes it rains like hell, but most of the time not. And when we get snow, it's usually really light and fluffy. So I sent you a message a number of months ago, and it might have been that Mike Patton show you were referring to, but you were talking about the energy that's in the water in the air that you bring in to cool the building, and what you need to do to get rid of that water in order to properly cool the transmitter.
Latent heat.
Yeah, exactly. And so most of the time we don't have to deal with that here. And I've been involved with a couple of transmitter sites that have done a really good job of avoiding the mechanical cooling and using outside air. And it's pretty effective most of the time.
Gotcha. So do you have sites where you use air conditioning in the summertime and you draw in outside air in the winter?
Yes.
Or are they all?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the FM sites, where I am now, I've got 3 high-powered transmitters, relatively. I mean, not super high-powered, but I think there's about 40 kilowatts of RF in that building. And I need the air conditioning in the summer when it gets really hot. But in the wintertime, no. And in my AM building, it's a solid-state Paris DX10. I don't have any mechanical cooling in there at all, just air. That one seems to be okay.
So even during the summer, it doesn't overheat. You're okay there.
No, not that one.
Wow.
The key is lots of surface area filters and keep the velocity down but the volume up. And
that's a great point.
The slower the air goes, the better you filter it.
Yeah.
And so this station here that I took over last year needs a little bit of a tweak. It's designed along those same lines. I think we need to have a bigger air intake, and we need to reposition the exhaust. Like out of stations, we'll have a hood over the transmitter to try to capture that air and bring it straight outside. I might need to reposition some of the ductwork in the building, but I think my biggest downfall at the moment is not bringing in enough outside air. I'm not sure why a bigger vent wasn't put in to begin with, but I hope to rectify that next summer.
So let's talk about some cold weather oddities or ills or things that you've run across. You were telling me about something about a satellite dish and an LNB, and it didn't like minus 30. Now, I don't know many people who do like minus 30, but this didn't like minus 30. What was going on there?
I thought the thing that was really humorous about it is the, how originally the LNAs and the LNBs, they're rated in noise temperature, so that you get the best carrier to noise performance out of it, right? And so they rate them in degrees Kelvin, and the lower, or as you would say, colder it is, the better performance you're going to get out of it. Well, apparently I've discovered the actual empirical limit to that as opposed to theoretical, and that this was in the early days of phase locked loop LNBs. I had put one on a digital radio receiver, and when it got to 30 below zero, some little piece of wire inside the LNB was too short to begin with, and when it got cold, it shrank and it disconnected. And then, no satellite music network or whatever it was we were bringing in. And so I called California Amplifier, and I cracked the joke about the low noise temperature LNB and told him what happened. And he just sent me a new one, but the unpleasant part was standing up on the ladder at 30 below zero. And you dress in layers when it's cold, right? So I've got my parka and some mitts, and I take my mitts off, and I've got some gloves, and I take some gloves off, and then I got the Poly Pro. They're almost like surgical gloves, right? They're really thin. They're like silk stocking type weight. Mm-hmm. And so with those, you still don't want to touch the bare metal. I'm working on the 7/16 hardware up in the focal point of the dish, trying to change that thing, and it's like every 15 seconds I'm like this. When do they go back to work?
I'll never complain again. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Hey, and now speaking of satellites, Chris Tobin, you've heard the news, I know, that all the major radio networks are switching from what they've called it AMC8, maybe it's called something.
AMC8, I don't know. And
and they're switching to another bird this summer. And this must be great for most of you guys on the East Coast, because you've been having these low look angles. Show it like this. If you're a radio station on the East Coast, your satellite dish is pointed just above the horizon to try to pick this satellite up, because it's right over American Samoa. Okay.
Pretty much, yeah.
And you're looking forward to swinging that dish a little bit higher and a little bit toward the south, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, yes. Here in New York City area, New Jersey, Connecticut, you're talking 10 degrees off the horizon. I remember working with some folks up in Maine. I believe their dishes were looking around 6 degrees. So the dish was pretty much looking into the dirt, if you will. And I remember when I worked for a radio network, we did have an affiliate who sent me a picture once. They actually dug out the ground, if you can think of the soil, in front of the dish. That's the angle it had looking down in order to get the... So the AMC8, formerly known as back in the day Satcom F1R, that goes way back to the GE Americom days, and RCA Americom actually, and it's coming offline. So this summer,
AKA Aurora.
AKA Aurora, yes, that's right.
For the one polarity that was spotted at Alaska.
Right, exactly.
So here's what now, and I've been thinking about my own sites. Most I don't have that many, but a couple of sites, no problem. Swing the dish a bit, we're in good shape. Now here's where, and by the way, John, I'm getting to you because you've got an amazing story about this move. It may not be the best thing for you Alaska broadcasters. There may be some trouble, but so most of my sites, no problem. I've got plenty of room to swing the dish and point it, a little higher in the sky and more to the south. Now there are plenty of people though, knowing that they're going to be on this satellite way down in the southwestern sky for a lot of America. that they positioned their dishes maybe up close to the building, and they may not have room to swing that big dish, 3.7 meter dish, almost a 12-foot, 13-foot dish, swing that because the edge of the dish is going to want to hit the building before they can swing the dish far enough. I may have one dish that's in that position where I sunk the post fairly close to the building, not wanting to build what's in a bad neighborhood, but not wanting to build the fence out too awful far. So I got to go check that site out next month and see, are we going to be able to move this dish, or do we have to sink another pole and really move the dish and move the fencing? Okay, so that being what is, every engineer needs to look at the specs of where they're going to need to move their dish to and make sure they can do it. They don't run into something like some places have a dish farm. You're going to move the dish, you're going to hit another dish, right, on the way moving over. John has another problem in Alaska. John, I didn't even think about this till you mentioned it. Take it away and tell us what your current situation is with AMC8 and what you're going to have to do.
Oh, well, there's a couple of points to this particular one. And by the way, I know we talked earlier today about the Google Earth thing that I did for the path to the satellite, and I just added that to the photo album. But I hadn't realized, and I always thought, well, I've got bragging rights in Alaska because our dishes, like Chris mentioned, are pointed into the ground. And I hadn't really thought about the guys on the East Coast that were pointed back towards 139 West. So, hats off to them for dealing with the same problems that I've dealt with for many years up here. And in fact, I had an exchange on the engineer distribution list for iHeart a couple weeks ago about this, where I cracked some joke about having to move the doghouse across the street when I re-aim my dish, because I'm going from 16 degrees elevation down to 9. And so somebody, Maine reminded me that they were going to have low elevation angles as well. And so this can be a problem anywhere that you go. So we're used to dealing with low angles, and
right.
And so I think maybe you might be referring to the story I told about Anchorage with the notch in the mountains. I'm not sure if that's where you want me to head. Well,
there's that too. Let's get to that. But just think about the geometry here. Right now, to look at AMC8, most of us are looking pretty hard to the west and fairly low in the sky. And you're looking pretty hard to the south.
We're slightly to the west,
south and a little bit west. But now, when they go to this other bird that's over farther to the east, you're going to be looking at a lower look angle toward it.
Yep.
That's just wow.
Well, it's the flip side of guys on the East Coast we're doing, but that's absolutely true. And also in that photo album, there's a picture of the contractor I hired demolishing the old 10-foot mesh dish that used to be our AMC8 dish until last year, when everybody that needed them got new 3.7 meter antennas, fully anticipating having to move to a new orbital position and needing a 2-degree compliant dish. But just as you alluded to a minute ago, this particular one didn't happen to get placed. It's sort of like you run out of space. Where are you going to put it? So it gets put up, and it turns out that it's great for AMC8, but the minute that you have to move it over and point it at 105, guess what? It's looking at the back of the 10-foot mesh dish. So bye-bye mesh dish.
Yeah.
And and unfortunately, the other thing that's going to happen at that time is, and when Chris was talking about Satcom F1R and I was mentioning Aurora, which was the name of half the satellite, kind of like a duplex, I guess. But many services in Alaska were delivered by satellite through the 80s and 90s, and still are to a great extent. There's some KU services now, but so everybody, just like the radio stations, the Alaska dishes are pointed at 139 forever and ever, and so the state put up its own satellite channel for television in rural villages, and this included then the capability of distributing first EBS and now EAS signals to stations around the state. My aim's an LP1, and so I have a receiver tied to the dish that's pointed at AMC8, sorry. That is it's this company called EMNet, And they do this for lots of organizations, not just the state of Alaska or emergency management. It's a satellite delivery system, and so we can do data and audio, and so that's the conduit for us getting tests. I'm mixing apples and oranges here. So the satellite signal was originally just on the state of Alaska television transponder. Tied to AMC-8. Later, the state came along with the MNet, and that's on a different satellite, which may save our bacon. But the ARCS transponder is got a service contract through 2018. I know that's way past the lifespan of AMC-8. And so now what's happening is that as an LP1, I'm going to move my premier networks for me and ABC News satellite dish off to 105, and I'm not going to have my statewide EAS distribution anymore, a broadcast distribution. Okay, I'll have the state emergency services MNet thing, but I won't have the ARCS broadcast EAS any longer. And so I'm not sure what's going to come of that yet. The company's not going to spend money for that. So I don't know if the Broadcasting Association is going to spend some money to put up some temporary dishes, or the transponder for ARCS is going to move to KU, and I can use a little, like an old AP News dish on the roof I might be able to use for that. So it's there's a conundrum there.
And you've got a story to tell about a couple of mountain peaks. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Also, thanks for reminding me about your pictures. How many pictures are into the album that you want to show us?
Oh, not too many, maybe 10 or so.
Okay. We'll get to that in just a minute. It's Kirk Harnack. You are listening to or watching This Week in Radio Tech, episode number 332. Our guest is John Antonuk, coming to us live from Fairbanks, Alaska. And we got more stories to tell and ways to fix things. So that's coming up. Plus, we're going to ask John about his time as an IT guy and contrast this with what he does now. Chris Tobin is along with us. He's at a voice studio in New Jersey. And right now we're going to take a little break and tell you about the folks from the Telos Alliance. I sat down at a Cracker Barrel with my friend Joe, and we did a little ad for the Direct Current newsletter. Take it away.
Not much in the paper today, is there?
Yeah, not much. Seems tough to stay informed,
Like we're missing out on stuff, important stuff.
Yeah, feels like week-old news. Yesterday's stories. Half the tech stuff in here seems out of date by the time I see it.
What Kirk doesn't know is I'm way ahead of everyone else around here. Every Thursday, I get this newsletter in my email. It's Direct Current. The folks at the Telos Alliance publish this.
What Joe doesn't know is I keep one step ahead of the radio guys in this market. Every Thursday, I get Direct Current from the folks at the Telos Alliance. It's a free newsletter about radio engineering, audio, streaming, studios, everything.
Thursday afternoons, we have our department head meeting. I look like a genius, thanks to the knowledge, updates, and advice in Direct Current. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell Kirk about Direct Current. Might help him out.
I wonder if I should let Joe in on my secret. He could use a little help sometimes.
Nah.
Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday. Read profiles of engineers and newsmakers in the broadcast community. Get technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. Important industry news and views. Plus, you'll be up to date on Telos, Omnia, Axia, and Zipstream products. It's all here in the Direct Current newsletter. Subscribe online at telosalliance.com/directcurrent. That's telosalliance.com/directcurrent.
I just got my new Direct Current today, and several articles in there. Good stuff. Check it out from the Telos Alliance. And thanks very much, Telos, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. John Antonuk from Fairbanks, Alaska is with us, as is Chris Tobin from studio in Newark, New Jersey. And next, Chris Tobin may have the problem of having to aim a satellite dish between a couple of buildings to plan that out, see if it'll work. John has a little different problem. It's kind of the same, though. It's aiming a satellite dish between two bigger things. Tell us about that, John.
So this was back in the late 80s, and one of my radio stations was going to go to Satellite Music Network. And the company I was working for at the time owned both radio and television stations, and out in the backyard, this is in Anchorage, had a Simulsat, and that's that big stretched dish that can have multiple LNAs at the focal point. And so when I did the math to calculate where we had to look for the satellite, which it was located at 87 degrees west, this is really low to the horizon from Anchorage, like 3.9 degrees or something like that. And so it was really questionable whether or not we were going to be able to see over the top of the mountain range, which is right next to Anchorage. And so if you're far enough out to the west, maybe the trigonometry helps you so that that low angle can get you over the mountains. And so for the most part, the top of the ridge of the mountains was too high, 6 degrees. But there's a couple places where there's a notch, and it's kind of hard to tell, even with an optical sight, whether you're going to go in that slot or not. And I learned that AP News was on 87 degrees, and that there was a big dish like 12 or 15 feet. And remember, this was probably an SCPC carrier for data, and this was in the era of 4-watt C-band transponders. It was on the roof of a hotel in downtown Anchorage, so pretty far away from the mountains and high up in the air. So I went down there to look at it. I talked to the guys. I said, is there any way we can split this feed and I can put a receiver here? And then I figured out what it would take to microwave the signal back to the station, which is about 3 miles away. And so I went to the owner of the station. I said, well, we can do this. It's going to cost $20,000 because I don't think we can see it from the studio site. He goes, I'll do that. But first, you need to go put an LNA up in the Simulsat and see whether or not we can actually get it. So I pop the cover off and I go way, way, way to the end, and I put that LNA in there. And this was at the time that these guys were like on some oddball 5.75 megahertz subcarrier on WGN or something like that, if you remember those days. And lo and behold, there it was, right at the right place in the notch. So it's a battle to this day for stations in Anchorage to get feeds. So that 87 degree west position is pretty much the low point, and only from certain spots in town, and so they can't see the entire arc from there. So better in Fairbanks, actually. Look angles are a little bit lower, but we're almost a couple hundred miles north of the mountain range here, so we don't have those kind of problems. Buildings in the way, yes. Mountains, not so much.
I remember those big Simulsat dishes. Those can't be 2 degree compliant, can they?
I doubt it. That one was put in the early 80s, and I don't think, what were we then, 3 degrees? So
3 or 4, yeah. Chris,
they're
do you
still
happen to know?
using it. I think they're just not trying to. They've got some stuff on it for I think the cable company owns it now.
Maybe I'm thinking about the geometry incorrectly. Maybe they are 2 degree. I mean, they're huge. Certainly, big enough to be 2 degree compliant. But I was thinking that because they're long, they wouldn't be in that way. But if you think about them as a series of parabolic reflectors, glued together, maybe they are compliant. Chris, if you're still on, chime in.
I'm still here. Still here.
Did you guys have any? Are there any Simulsat dishes still in use in your neck of the woods?
I have not. I was just looking up. I was just trying to remember. I could have sworn somebody said that they were if you had a certain model, but I could be wrong. It's hard to say. I'm looking at a site that's talking about the Simulsats. But
I think this one was nominally 6 meters.
Yeah, that sounds right. This site says the Simulsat 5B and Legacy Simulsats. So there's probably a good chance that the newer version, it looks like the newer version, maybe they made it compliant. I can't be certain, but anybody who's got one knows exactly what's going on. But now
I think basically what's happening, of course, is that you're chopping off the top and the bottom of the parabola, so you're losing a little bit of gain in that regard. So it's not the same thing as so you might have like the full 5 or 6 meters horizontally, but maybe only 4 vertically. But since the satellites are horizontal, you put it for the tilt or the inclination of the orbit from your perspective, it might be 2-degree compliant. I never really thought about it. When I was working on it, it wasn't an issue.
Yeah. Wow. I remember typically you see them at cable TV companies at their head ends.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they put them in to avoid a whole farm of dishes. They put in one big honking Simulsat. What a monstrosity.
Yeah. Well, there were folks here in the city area. I was just talking with somebody yesterday at Nippon Television, and they were telling me how they have a couple of their folks they work with, some radio folks, and they had heard that some of them, their dishes, when they move it to the 105-degree west longitude location, this orbital slot, they're going to be looking right into a building.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, so it's for some folks it's going to be an easy move, and others are going to find some new things. And I know from years past in many urban areas, sighting AMC-8 was easy because it happened to be just in the right spot for whatever reason where buildings were not an obstruction. But as you went higher in the orbital arc, you noticed all of a sudden the skyscrapers became a problem, even for guys on KU as well. Yeah.
Interesting. So John, part of your career included a big stint, quite a few years, as an IT person. You weren't doing radio, or at least not much at that time, right?
Not full time, right? I call it the lost weekend.
So lost weekend. So kind of, a lot of times we in radio struggle with maybe a corporate IT department that seems to be at odds with what we need to do, or we as engineers, audio people, full-time, RF people, we feel like they don't understand our needs. They pull the plug when they need to, they reboot stuff whenever they need to, and the email will come in later. Well, we're not doing email here. We're doing live audio or video. Would you just talk to us about that experience as an IT guy and how maybe that has helped inform you now, or how it's helped you work with IT people now on the corporate level or locally or whatever? What would that add to your experience?
Well, I think it's helped me work with the corporate IT people and at least understand what's going on the other end. I don't think that we should regard them as the enemy. It's made our lives easier in a lot of ways. Thank goodness we don't have to work on cart machines and tape machines anymore, that kind of stuff. So, that's a good deal. I went off in 1999, and I had been doing. I was the IT person for the station I was working at, as well as being the chief engineer. And the TV station got sold, and so I took a different opportunity to do IT. I was working on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline for a couple of years. That was pretty fascinating, driving up and down the Hall Road and working on business computers at the pump stations. That was pretty amazing, and saw some big things and got exposed to the methodology that the way large corporations do things. And then that contractor lost their contract, and I moved back to working in town, and then I worked for a gold mine. We do a lot of gold mining in Alaska. A great big open pit mine called Fort Knox, and was owned and operated by a company from Canada called Kinross Gold. And so the business office computers, just like everything else, has it. And so they had line of business application and things delivered through Citrix, things of that nature. So I started in the arena way back in the day of the DOS 3 at the original level, and then moving into Windows 3.1 and stuff like that, and then a little bit of early Novell NetWare for standalone systems like King Newsroom software that we had at Channel 11. And then when I got working at Alyeska, they were in the process of just bringing Windows NT4 into the environment, and we still had all the Novell NetWare bindery services. It wasn't eDirectory yet. It was still running IPX, SPX, but a lot of back-end stuff. And then at Kinross, It was pretty much it was originally a Novell shop when I got there. Same thing. And then we graduated to NetWare 5 and 6 and moved to IP and eDirectory and the back ends had the data center and the AS400 computers. And so, I'm the edge guy, and then there's central people and I went to a lot of conferences and got a good perspective on what's happening at the back end. And even as an end user, I still get frustrated because it seems to turn as slow as a super tanker when you get that big. And so you run into the problem where the immediacy of broadcasting, and I need something to happen, and I need it to be highly available. And it's really hard to make that leap for some companies to get that level of availability, or for the mindset for the IT folks to understand the unacceptableness of having that downtime.
Yeah.
I think they honestly pay lip service to it, but they haven't been in that mode so much. And that's all different levels in the IT environment, just like it is in broadcasting. So,
Sure.
The stations that I'm used to working at, if we had 10 seconds of dead air, it's not a big deal. If the station's in Manhattan where Chris has worked or does now, people are shouting and heads roll. So that happens in IT as well in terms of availability. So it's been helpful to understand what happens in the back end so that I can help translate to them. Here's our requirements and to our staff going like, well, why doesn't this thing work? And it's likely because of this. So it's been a good thing. I wasn't sure that I was going to come back to broadcasting full time, but serendipity sees me here.
You provided us with some pictures. Let's jump into those and have a look. And you can tell us about, because the pictures tell 1,000 words. I didn't know what Anchorage looked like till I saw it on Google Earth. So, Suncast, can you go ahead and pop up the first picture for us? What are we looking at here, John?
This is KCBF radio, AM 820, and this is in Fairbanks. I helped build this station about 20 years ago, working for a different company, and I was standing on the porch, which you'll see in a minute, of KFBX, the station I work for now, when that rainbow occurred. I went. We'll get to that Barry Mishkind imitation in a minute. And so this is the first picture I ever posted on I Take Pictures of Transmitter Sites on Facebook.
Yeah.
And it has led to a great waste of time, if you ask my wife. So
I hear you. All right, let's see the next picture. Your Barry Mishkind imitation? What was that?
Yeah. So you're familiar with the Broadcaster's Desktop reference and Barry Mishkind.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
And this happens to be the KOMO backup transmitter, or their second alternate backup transmitter. It's like a 60-year-old RCA BTA 1F or something like that. And Barry stood inside of a Continental transmitter and had somebody take his picture, and he used it for the cover of his newsletter. Oh, I don't know, a year ago or so, maybe.
Yeah.
And
I think I've seen that picture. Yeah.
I hadn't. When I saw this, and this transmitter is so big, you can walk inside of it, which is what I'm doing. I mean, I didn't post the other pictures, but the high voltage vault is, it's like a locker room in there, and so it was pretty fun. So nods to Barry for doing this, and it turns out that his picture inside the Continental was actually in this very same room on the other side of the room in that transmitter.
How about that? Huh?
So that was kind of fun. This is taken during a visit to Vashon Island near Seattle, where another iHeart engineer from Anchorage, Van Craft, and I went down for the summer picnic for SBE, and met the guys down there and had a really good time, and went on a tour of the transmitter crawl, sort of like a pub crawl, but for nerds.
Huh. So what's next? Let's see our next picture. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left, so let's buzz through them as we can here. Okay. All there you go.
So this is the KFBX transmitter site. That's my AM transmitter site out of town here, a couple miles. And there's permafrost in Alaska. And this building here was built about 20 years ago. And when it was built, the bottom edge of the siding was about 12 inches above grade. and it's on pilings because it's known to be permafrost. And over the years, the ground, the ice in the ground thawed and melted, and the water evaporated, and the ground subsided. And this happened over and over and over again, to the point where I actually had to use that ladder that you see in the picture to get into the building. I suspect these are out of sequence, but you see a couple other pictures, one with no porch, and then finally one with it completed. That's over a period of about 20 years.
So the building didn't lift, and we're used to that with
the
like
building
frost,
didn't lift, the
evil,
ground sank.
right? Yeah, the ground sank. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's
All
another
right,
good picture of the base of the tower and what was done to fix that too.
What's next? Let's see the next one here.
So there's the
another porch
completed
picture.
stairs.
Okay, so you can
And,
safely walk up the stairs. Wow,
So
good
we
deal.
can
And next?
proceed from there.
Next picture. There you
okay.
go. Oh, okay.
So this was 3 years ago, before I got here, but I saw him do the work, and the ground was sinking under the tower as well, and the guy anchors were pulling out. And so the tower crew said, you know what, we can't tension this. The anchors are pulling out. We're not going to climb the tower because it's not safe, blah, blah, blah. And so the answer is, after some geotechnical engineering, to drive 40-foot long I-beams into the ground. There's one at each anchor. And then there's two were driven on either side of the previously existing tower base. And then they loosened the guy wires, picked up the tower with a crane. This tower's about 220 feet tall. Okay. And then put the horizontal beam in, set it back down, move the guy anchors while the tower's being still held by the crane from the old to the new anchor locations, and retension it. And it should be good to go now.
Wow, that is really unusual, but I guess that's how you'd fix that problem.
Yeah.
Man. All right, what's next?
Just a wide shot of the transmitter site. Looks kind of low in the swampy permafrost area there. You can see a little building with a generator and a dish.
What's all that?
This is not a broadcasting site, but this is the High Altitude Aurora Research Project in Gacona, south of Fairbanks. HARP. If you've ever heard of it.
Yes. I've heard of it. I don't know much about it. Is this where they call space aliens?
They do, and and the people that think it does mind control have missed the logical syllogism that says if it really did mind control, they wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, there you go. Yes. Well,
so I think there's
what
like
are we looking
3
at
dozen
there?
of those antennas, and they're each fed by 4 transmitters and at 10 kilowatts apiece, and it should be on people's bucket list for transmitter sites to go see. It's being operated by the University of Fairbanks now. It was previously a DoD facility.
Okay, cool. What's next here?
Just a little more close-up view of the transmitter site. There's a generator in there and some stuff.
Yeah.
We saw that before. So this is the roof of the building where we're tearing down the old mesh dish, and the white dish on the right-hand side is the 3.7 meter antenna. It's the new AMC8 and SES11 dish, and the little KU dish in the lower left-hand corner is the emergency MNet dish.
Yeah. All right. So that dish is going to have to the big white one's going to have to swing around to its left and point lower in the sky.
Yeah, it would be pointing right at the mesh dish when it points at SES11.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
So.
All right. Next.
So some guy has longer hair and less gray hair, and so this is me on a trip to Barrow in 1991, where I went up to move this transmitter because I had a transmitter on the air just like it in Anchorage, and they were moving transmitter sites, and they're going to move the building, and so this picture's taken in a cargo trailer. And so, we used a forklift to move the transmitter out of the building into the cargo trailer, cut the transmission line, bring it into the building here, and then they could do a house moving thing to move this other building, which is like 30 by 30, out to their new transmitter site outside of town. And I asked the guy that hired me, or he was telling me when he hired me to do the job, I flew up from Anchorage to do it, and he said, I'm hiring you because I can run faster than you. And I said, so? And he goes, well, it's because of the polar bears. The transmitter site is located in between the Arctic Ocean and the dump, and the bears like to come off the ice and scrounge around the dump. So when you go out the door, look around before you just go out. That's a fun story. I actually saw some bears, but they didn't get in the way.
Oh man, polar bears.
That was my first exposure to 30 below zero. That was, I think, in February of 1991.
Gee whiz. Oh, man. Hey, we got to pause right here. I got to do a quick ad for our other sponsor, Lavo, and then we're going to just have time for a tip of the week from each of us. Hey, you're watching or listening to This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack. Our guest is John Antonuk, and Chris Tobin is along here, too. He's in a studio in Newark, New Jersey. We're going to hear a tip from Chris here in just a minute. Our show is brought to you in part by Lavo, and most of you know me as a broadcast engineer, an on-air guy, and the host of TWiRT. Well, what you may not know is that for years I sold broadcast equipment internationally, working for Telos. They sent me all around the world, meeting people, going to studios. I've been to studios in so many countries. And it was really interesting to see the different imaginative ways that people do things. That's one of the reasons why I'm excited to introduce you to our sponsor, Lavo, and that's LAWO.com. Now, they're famous around the world for television and audio consoles, audio consoles specifically meant for television, especially for high-profile event coverage like the Olympics, World Cup soccer, Grammy Awards, things like that. Well, when the broadcast is mission-critical, you're very likely to find a Lavo console there. Now, the stuff is really built. It's over-engineered, a lot of redundancy involved. Even their backups have backups, right? Because there's no do-overs in live event broadcasting, and dead air could kill your career. Well, you might be thinking, why should I care? I'm not doing TV. This is a radio show. Well, us radio guys hate dead air even more than TV guys do. And that's why broadcasters like NPR, CBC, and the BBC, to name a few, buy Lavo radio consoles. So being this involved in TV and radio around the world means that Lavo thinks a lot about the future, too. Everybody knows that all types of media are converging on a common IP delivery platform, and Lavo's ready for it, with broadcast gear that handles audio, video, and control of every studio device using a single commercial off-the-shelf computer network. And after that, well, they're working on virtualization and broadcasting from the cloud with some very cool solutions. So if absolute bulletproof reliability, 5 nines of uptime, and being future-proof or certainly future-ready are important to you, you owe it to yourself to check out Lavo. Now, here's a special URL to go to on your browser to find out more. Please do this, Lavo, LAWO.com/TWiRT, TWiRT. That way we'll get credit for your visit to Lavo.com. Again, that's LAWO.com/TWiRT to find out more. And thanks a lot to Lavo for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, we are shy on time, and so let's real quick go to Chris Tobin is usually ready with a tip of the week. Chris, what you got for us?
All right, tip of the week, real simple, straightforward. If you're buying new transmitters and you're going to build a transmitter room, here's something I discovered recently. A transmitter I was working on had a power supply issue. Turns out to access that power supply, it's on the right-hand side of the cabinet. Well, the right-hand side of the cabinet is up against 3 of the equipment racks. Picture 1 transmitter on the left, 3 equipment racks in the middle, and a transmitter on the right. So it now requires climbing inside from the top, and it's just a mess. So if you're building a new facility or making changes, make sure you know exactly where and how to access all the internal workings. Back in the day, if you had a Continental, an RCA, or a Rockwell Collins, most of the work was done front and back. Very rarely did you have to pull the sides off unless you're taking out a transformer. So give that some. But also one note, I have to just say, I just got an email. Those of you who know Bill Sachs.
Yeah.
Passed away.
He did. Yeah. And I was going to mention that. And thank you very much. I'll mention a bit more about that in just a minute.
Right, I'll give it to you.
Thanks. And to your point about transmitters, so you're saying look at the transmitter internal, see what you may have to get to, and do everything you can to not block something that you've got to get to or could have to get to.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Wow. One time, the first big Continental FM I ever worked on was installed such that there was 0 room on the left, 0 room on the right, and a wall in the back. You could only access the front of the transmitter. It was a 20 kilowatt Continental transmitter. Actually, I think it had the Collins name on it. But that was always fun, working on that transmitter from one side only. I don't know. One time I had to replace the low pass filter. I think I think I took out the whole tube cavity to get to the low pass filter, attached to the back of the tube cavity. What a mess. Good idea. Be careful about that. John, I didn't really warn you much about this. Do you have a tip you'd like to pass along to our listeners?
Kirk, I've been watching this show for the entire history, so I knew it was coming. So you should always have a backup. I have a backup transmitter site here. But a more practical tip is, and this is we talked about teaching moments earlier today when we were visiting, and I was conversing with a guy who had more of an IT background when he was working on a studio, and I said, "What's your house zero VU audio level, or how do you adjust your levels?" And he wasn't familiar with the concept, and zero VU equals so many dBm equals so many volts and so forth, and even for the modern era, where if you're going to go AOIP, you still have that transition point, whether it's a node or something else like that. And it's important to understand what those reference audio levels are and how to deal with them. So a lot of the work that I'm doing here now involves making sure that things are calibrated, and that when we change from an XLR type of a connector to an RCA type of a connector, that we have the proper levels, that we don't short out half the balanced line, and to get things set properly. This plant is mostly a studio hub plant, well made when it was installed. The wiring standard actually changed after they did it, and so now I'm faced with having to integrate Studio Hub Legacy with Studio Hub Plus wiring schemes and check all kinds of levels. I built a little breakout box. It's a bunch of RJ45s and some XLRs. The gray RJ45s are Studio Hub Legacy. The yellow ones are Studio Hub Plus. There's enough connectors to break into the line and get a monitor, or to break into an XLR. So I can go in and out and do lots of different things. And then here's the practical part of this tip is, I'm sure that a lot of guys that have been around for a long time worked with like a Potomac Instruments 51 series audio test set, AT and AG 51s. So not everybody's blessed with having that. But if you have a mic mixer, like I've got an old Shure 267 here, I can set a zero VU tone out of it. And here's my audio test meter. Nothing fancy. It's not a frequency response meter. But when I want to set 0 VU to plus 4 dBm, I dial in 1.23 volts, and Bob's your uncle. And after I go through the matchbox and I want to look at the level coming out on the RCA connector, I'm looking for 315 millivolts. And that works in both directions. So it's important to understand that it's not just grab the mouse and drag it or tweak it till it sounds okay, because then you're going to destroy your signal to noise ratio in your headroom, if any. So calibrate along each step of the way and know what you're headed at.
Good deal. Good advice always. Audio level is one of the most overlooked things in a lot of plants where it's all a mess. John, thanks very much. And as Chris Tobin alluded to a few minutes ago, we just got word earlier today that our friend, he was also a guest on the show here, Bill Sachs. He was the founder of Straight Wire Audio. Bill Sachs has passed away. And we send our condolences out to his wife, Kim Sachs. Kim and I have served together on the SBE board of directors. Kim has been very full-time the last few months taking care of Bill as at home as a hospice patient. And so we're very sad to hear this news. Bill was a real innovator and beloved by many, many engineers, both personally, because he's a great guy, so much fun to spend time with, and for his fantastic designs. His company, Straight Wire Audio, made phono preamps. That was the first product I was introduced to. And then they made a lot of electronics, retrofit electronics to go into a lot of other things. He also made this amazing CD player that would actually, you could cue it up to audio back in the day when that was kind of a problem. And more recent, and he also worked with Hank Landsberg at Henry Engineering to make some excellent USB audio interfaces of the highest audio quality. So we may have some more news about this at another time, but there was a thread on Facebook about Bill Sachs where Paul McLean of Radio World asked people to share their comments and experiences. But there's a good article in Radio World. We'll share that on the show notes when that gets published here in the next day or two. So Bill Sachs passed away, and again, our condolences to his family, especially to Kim Sachs. So we lost a very good one, and they're few and far between. Hey, I want to thank Chris Tobin for being with us here on This Week in Radio Tech. Chris, as always, thank you very much for being here, buddy. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's always a good time. Always.
And John Antonuk from Fairbanks, Alaska, many time zones away and a lot of miles. A lot of traveling of packets from there to New York to join us. Thank you.
So, well, thanks, Kirk. It was fun. And we've managed to get Joe Mock and John Bissett up to the Alaska Broadcasters Association convention every November, and you haven't put in an appearance yet. So can I pencil you in for this November?
I got to ask my boss. I don't know. Okay. Don't know if it's in the budget, the time budget or the money budget. They usually got me doing others. I would
maybe
really
I'll see you in Madison next fall.
Yeah. I do plan to be there. All right, thanks so much, John. John Antonuk, Chief Engineer for iHeartMedia in Fairbanks, Alaska. We got to go. Thanks to Suncast, our producer, for producing the show. And thanks also to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network, where you'll find lots of other good podcasts. Tell your friends about This Week in Radio Tech and subscribe. That way it'll download automatically to whatever device or devices you have. You can get the audio version, the video version. Check all those links out at thisweekinradiotech.com. I'm Kirk Harnack. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.